Lieutenant Commander Kenji Yamamoto had seen American cities reduced to ash. He'd watched their ships burn in Pearl Harbor. He'd flown through clouds of black smoke over the Pacific, believing he understood everything about his enemy. But on a crisp October morning in 1955, standing outside a gleaming red and white building in San Bernardino, California, he was about to discover he knew nothing at all. The war had ended 10 years ago, and Kenji was part of a Japanese military delegation studying American industrial methods. His superiors wanted to understand how America had rebuilt so quickly, how they'd become so efficient at everything from manufacturing cars to constructing buildings. But right now, all Kenji could focus on was the incredible smell drifting from this strange restaurant and the line of Americans, workers in coveralls, businessmen in suits, mothers with children, all waiting for the same thing: a hamburger. Back in Tokyo, Kenji had eaten at the finest restaurants, places where master chefs spent decades perfecting a single dish. Each meal was an artistic ceremony, requiring patience, reverence, and significant money. The idea that common workers and wealthy businessmen would stand in the same line, waiting for food prepared in minutes rather than hours, seemed impossible. Yet here they were, and none of them appeared to be settling for something inferior. The delegation's interpreter, a young American named Robert Chen whose parents had immigrated from China, nudged Kenji forward. "Sir, we should probably try the food before we analyze their methods. The McDonald brothers agreed to show us their kitchen operation, but they want us to experience it as customers first." Kenji adjusted his civilian clothes, still feeling strange without his uniform. The U.S. military had insisted all delegates dress as ordinary civilians during their industrial visits, wanting to avoid drawing attention to what was essentially an intelligence-gathering mission disguised as cultural exchange. As they approached the counter, he noticed something that made his breath catch: the speed. Behind the counter, young men in white uniforms and paper hats moved with precision that reminded him of his own flight crew during combat operations. But instead of loading ammunition and checking instruments, they were assembling hamburgers. One man grabbed a bun, another slapped on the meat patty, a third added pickles and onions, and a fourth wrapped the entire creation in paper. The whole process took less than 30 seconds. 30 seconds. In Japan, Kenji's favorite sushi master took 15 minutes just to properly slice the fish for a single piece of nigiri. This wasn't just fast, it was impossibly fast, and yet every hamburger coming off their assembly line looked identical to the last. "Next!" called a cheerful teenager behind the counter. The boy couldn't have been older than 17, but he spoke with the confidence of someone who had mastered his craft. "What would you like today?" Robert translated as Kenji stammered out his order: 2 hamburgers, French fries, and a Coca-Cola. The teenager punched buttons on a metal register that chimed with each press, called out the order to the kitchen crew behind him, and within seconds had moved on to the next customer. But here's what stopped Kenji cold: the price. 15 cents for a hamburger, 10 cents for French fries, a nickel for the Coca-Cola, 30 cents total for a complete meal. 30 cents. In Tokyo, 30 cents would barely buy you a single rice ball from a street vendor. Here, it bought you what appeared to be a feast, served faster than he could process what was happening, by workers who treated every customer exactly the same whether they wore expensive suits or factory coveralls. As they waited for their order, Kenji watched the flow of customers. Construction workers with dirt under their fingernails stood behind bank executives in pressed shirts. A mother with 3 young children ordered the same food as a well-dressed elderly man who'd arrived in a Cadillac. Everyone paid the same prices, everyone was served with the same speed and courtesy, everyone received identical food. This wasn't just a restaurant. This was something else entirely. "Order up." The teenager slid a red plastic tray across the counter containing their food. Everything was wrapped in white paper printed with red and yellow stripes, creating a presentation that was somehow both humble and festive. They found a small table outside, and Kenji unwrapped his first McDonald's hamburger with the same careful attention he'd once used to inspect his aircraft before dangerous missions. The bun was soft and slightly sweet. The meat patty was thin but perfectly cooked. The pickles added a sharp tang that cut through the richness. The onions provided just enough bite. The ketchup and mustard created a sauce that somehow made all the other flavors work together. It wasn't the best hamburger he'd ever eaten, but it wasn't trying to be. It was something far more revolutionary. It was exactly the same hamburger that every other customer received, prepared in exactly the same way, for exactly the same price, in exactly the same amount of time. This wasn't about culinary excellence. This was about something Kenji was only beginning to understand. Consistency, democracy, efficiency. Everything he thought he knew about American culture had come from military briefings focused on their industrial capacity and technological advantages. But sitting outside this small restaurant in San Bernardino, watching an endless stream of Americans from every social class enjoy identical meals prepared by teenagers who moved like precision machinery, Kenji realized he'd been analyzing the wrong data entirely. This wasn't about hamburgers. This was about a completely different way of thinking about human needs and how to meet them. As he took his second bite, a thought occurred to him that would haunt his dreams for weeks. If Americans could democratize food this efficiently, what else were they democratizing while he wasn't paying attention? The McDonald brothers, Dick and Mac, agreed to give the Japanese delegation a behind-the-scenes tour the next morning. Kenji arrived early, notebook in hand, expecting to see a traditional kitchen with experienced cooks preparing food the way restaurants had operated for centuries. Instead, he walked into what looked like a factory floor that happened to serve food. "Welcome to the Speedy system," Dick McDonald announced proudly, gesturing toward a kitchen layout unlike anything Kenji had ever seen. Everything you're about to see was designed around a single principle: eliminate waste, maximize efficiency, and make every motion count. The kitchen was divided into stations, each one designed for a specific task. The grill station could cook dozens of hamburger patties simultaneously, all arranged in perfect rows. The bun station toasted exactly 2 halves at a time in a specialized toaster. The assembly station had predetermined spots for each ingredient, measured dispensers for condiments, and a wrapping area that could package completed burgers in seconds. But the revelation wasn't the equipment. It was the workers. Each employee was trained to perform one specific job perfectly rather than being expected to master every aspect of cooking. The grill operator focused entirely on cooking meat patties to exact specifications. The assembly person added ingredients in a precise sequence designed to minimize movement and maximize speed. The wrapper had mastered the art of creating identical packages in minimal time. "We studied every motion our workers made," Mac McDonald explained as they watched the morning rush begin. Every unnecessary step was eliminated. Every tool was placed exactly where it needed to be. Every recipe was simplified to its essential elements. Kenji scribbled notes frantically, but his mind kept racing beyond the immediate observations. This wasn't just about hamburgers. This was about applying industrial manufacturing principles to human needs in a way that benefited everyone involved. The workers weren't skilled artisans who spent years learning their craft. They were ordinary people who could master their specific role in a matter of days. Yet the system they worked within allowed them to serve hundreds of customers per day with quality control that most traditional restaurants could never achieve. "How do you maintain consistency?" Kenji asked through Robert's translation. "In Japan, consistency comes from a master's years of experience perfecting every detail." Dick smiled. "That's exactly the problem we solved. Instead of relying on individual expertise that takes years to develop and can be lost when a worker leaves, we created a system where the expertise is built into the process itself." He walked them over to the grill station where a young man who looked barely out of high school was cooking dozens of patties simultaneously. "Tommy here has been working for us for 3 weeks. But watch his consistency." Dick pointed to the rows of meat patties, each one identical in size, color, and doneness. "He's not a master chef, but the system allows him to produce results that match our exact specifications every single time." The implications hit Kenji like a physical blow. In Japan, quality was maintained through hierarchy, tradition, and individual mastery developed over decades. Master craftsmen guarded their knowledge, passing it down selectively to chosen apprentices who spent years learning not just techniques but the cultural context surrounding their craft. But what he was witnessing eliminated the need for masters entirely. The knowledge was embedded in the system, available to anyone willing to follow the procedures. A teenager could produce consistent results on his first day that would take a traditional apprentice months to achieve. This wasn't just democratizing food. This was democratizing expertise itself. "The real breakthrough," Matt continued, leading them toward the supply area, "came when we realized that most restaurant problems stem from trying to do too many things adequately instead of doing a few things perfectly." He showed them the limited menu posted on the wall. Hamburgers, cheeseburgers, French fries, soft drinks, coffee, milk, and pie. 9 items total. No substitutions, no special orders, no variations. Traditional restaurants try to satisfy every possible customer preference, Mac explained. Different cooking methods, custom preparations, varied ingredients. All that flexibility creates complexity, and complexity creates inefficiency and inconsistency. Kenji thought about the restaurants he frequented in Tokyo. Each chef prided himself on his vast repertoire, his ability to create dozens of different dishes, his flexibility in accommodating customer requests. The more complex the preparation, the more respected the establishment. But complexity, he now realized, was the enemy of democracy. When every order was different, only highly skilled workers could manage the kitchen. When ingredients varied constantly, supply costs increased and waste was inevitable. When preparation methods changed from dish to dish, training became lengthy and expensive. When customers expected customization, service slowed and prices rose. By limiting their menu to 9 items, the McDonald brothers had created something revolutionary. A restaurant that could serve excellent food quickly and cheaply while employing workers who could master their roles in days rather than years. But don't your customers want variety? Robert asked, translating his own curiosity rather than Kenji's question. Dick laughed. That's what we thought at first. But we discovered something interesting. Most customers don't actually want endless choices. They want to know that whatever they choose will be good, fast, and affordable. Once they trust your consistency, they're happy to have fewer options. As if to prove his point, the lunch rush began and Kenji watched the same pattern repeat that he'd observed the day before. Customers approached the counter with confidence, ordered quickly from the limited menu, and left satisfied with food that met their expectations perfectly. No one complained about the lack of substitutions. No one seemed disappointed by the limited choices. Instead, they appeared relieved by the simplicity, the speed, and the predictable quality. The final piece of the puzzle, Max said, leading them back toward the dining area, is understanding what business we're really in. He paused by the window overlooking the parking lot where families sat in their cars, workers took quick breaks between jobs, and teenagers gathered after school. We're not in the restaurant business. We're in the convenience business. People don't come here because we make the world's greatest hamburger. They come here because we make a consistently good hamburger faster and cheaper than anyone else. That evening, Kenji sat in his hotel room trying to process what he'd witnessed. He'd filled an entire notebook with observations about kitchen layout, workflow optimization, and employee training methods. But the deeper implications kept pulling his attention away from the technical details. Everything he'd been taught about quality, craftsmanship, and service was being challenged by what he'd seen at McDonald's. In Japan, excellence was achieved through individual mastery, lengthy apprenticeships, and complex preparations that honored tradition and demonstrated respect for the craft. But the McDonald brothers had achieved something different. They'd created a system that consistently delivered satisfaction to hundreds of people every day while providing employment to workers who could master their roles quickly and earn fair wages for honest work. Their hamburgers weren't perfect, but their system was. And as Kenji looked out his hotel window at the endless stream of cars passing by on Route 66, each one carrying Americans who expected their daily needs to be met efficiently and affordably, he began to understand something that would change his perspective on everything from manufacturing to governance to social organization. Americans weren't just efficient by accident. They were systematically designing efficiency into every aspect of their society, creating systems that allowed ordinary people to achieve extraordinary results. The question that kept him awake that night wasn't about hamburgers or restaurants or even industrial methods. It was much bigger. If this kind of systematic efficiency could revolutionize something as basic as feeding people, what else could it revolutionize? And what did it mean for a nation like Japan, still rebuilding from the war, still relying on traditional methods and hierarchical systems that prioritized perfection over accessibility? 3 days later, Kenji stood in the Henry Ford Museum in Detroit, staring at the assembly line that had revolutionized automobile manufacturing. But instead of seeing it with fresh eyes, he found himself thinking about hamburgers. The delegation was touring American industrial sites to understand how the United States had achieved such remarkable economic recovery after the war. They'd visited steel mills in Pittsburgh, aircraft factories in Seattle, and now the birthplace of mass production in Detroit. But everything he observed seemed connected to what he'd experienced at that small restaurant in San Bernardino. The genius of Ford's system, their guide explained, gesturing toward the recreated assembly line, wasn't just about speed. It was about making complex manufacturing accessible to ordinary workers while maintaining quality control. Kenji scribbled notes, but his mind was racing ahead. Ford had taken the skilled craftsmanship required to build automobiles and broken it down into simple, repeatable tasks that could be mastered quickly. The McDonald brothers had done exactly the same thing with food service. Both systems eliminated the need for years of training while actually improving consistency and reducing costs. But the implications went far beyond manufacturing. That evening, the delegation attended a formal dinner with Detroit business leaders. Kenji found himself seated next to Margaret Patterson, a middle-aged woman who managed procurement for General Motors. As the conversation turned to Japan's reconstruction efforts, she asked a question that caught him off guard. What strikes you most about American industrial methods? Through Robert's translation, Kenji tried to articulate the thoughts that had been building since his McDonald's experience. In Japan, we believe excellence comes from master craftsmen who spend decades perfecting their skills. But here, I see excellence coming from systems that allow ordinary people to achieve extraordinary results. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. That's very perceptive. But can I ask you something? In Japan, how many people can afford to buy products made by master craftsmen? The question hit like a revelation. In Japan, true quality was expensive because it required rare expertise. Master swordsmiths, master sushi chefs, master carpenters. Their products were accessible only to those who could pay premium prices for their years of training and artistic vision. Very few, Kenji admitted. Here's what I think you're really observing, Margaret continued. Americans figured out how to democratize quality. Instead of having a few masters serving the wealthy, we created systems that allow many workers to serve everyone. She gestured toward the other dinner guests, a mix of engineers, managers, and skilled workers who all appeared to enjoy similar standards of living despite their different roles. The Ford worker who installs doors doesn't need to understand how to build an entire automobile. But the system he works within allows him to contribute to creating reliable transportation that ordinary families can afford. The McDonald's worker doesn't need to be a master chef, but the system allows him to provide good food quickly and affordably to hundreds of people every day. As Kenji listened, he realized he was hearing about something more profound than industrial efficiency. This was about a fundamentally different approach to human organization and social progress. In Japan, advancement came through individual excellence within established hierarchies. Students worked for years to gain acceptance to prestigious universities. Apprentices spent decades learning from masters. Workers gradually climbed company ranks based on loyalty and incremental skill development. The system produced remarkable individual achievements but limited access to quality and opportunity. But what he was observing in America was systematic democratization. Instead of expecting individuals to spend years mastering complex skills, Americans were designing systems that embedded expertise into processes that ordinary people could execute effectively. The next morning, the delegation visited a suburban Detroit neighborhood where many Ford workers lived. Kenji expected to see modest housing reflecting the limited means of assembly line employees. Instead, he found well-maintained homes with modern appliances, personal automobiles, and children playing in yards that suggested broad prosperity rather than concentrated wealth. Their guide, a Ford employee named William Henderson, invited them into his home for coffee. As they sat in his living room, surrounded by conveniences that would have been luxuries in most Japanese homes, William explained his family's situation. I've been installing windshields for 12 years, he said through Robert's translation. It's not complicated work, but it's steady and it pays well enough for us to live comfortably. He gestured toward photos of his children on the mantel. My son is studying engineering at the University of Michigan. My daughter wants to be a teacher. The system that lets me do simple work efficiently creates the prosperity that gives them opportunities one never had. Kenji stared at the photographs, processing what he was hearing. William's work was repetitive and required no advanced training. In Japan, such work would be poorly paid and socially looked down upon. But here, it provided a foundation for upward mobility and broad prosperity. The beauty of the American system, William continued, isn't that everyone gets to be a master craftsman. It's that everyone gets to contribute meaningfully to something bigger than themselves while earning enough to pursue their own dreams. That afternoon, as the delegation prepared to depart Detroit, Kenji asked Robert to help him make a personal phone call. He wanted to speak with Dick McDonald back in San Bernardino. I've been thinking about our conversation, he told Dick through Robert's translation. You said you weren't in the restaurant business. You were in the convenience business. But I think it's bigger than that. There was a pause as Robert translated Dick's response. What do you think we're really in? Kenji had spent the last week formulating his answer. You're in the democracy business. You've created a system that provides good food quickly and affordably to anyone who wants it, regardless of their social status or economic position. You've created jobs that allow ordinary people to contribute meaningfully while earning fair wages. You've eliminated the barriers that traditionally separated the wealthy from quality goods and services. Dick's laughter came through clearly even before Robert translated his response. You know, in all the years we've been explaining our system to other business people, no one has ever described it quite that way. But I think you're absolutely right. As Kenji hung up the phone, he realized his understanding had evolved far beyond the technical aspects of American industrial methods. What he'd witnessed wasn't just about efficiency or profitability. It was about a systematic approach to human organization that prioritized broad access over exclusive excellence, that embedded expertise into processes rather than concentrating it in individuals, and that created prosperity by serving everyone rather than serving the few exceptionally well. That night, as he wrote his final report for the Japanese military delegation, Kenji found himself focusing less on the specific industrial techniques they'd observed and more on the philosophical principles underlying American economic success. The Americans have discovered something we must understand, he wrote. They have learned to create systems that allow ordinary people to achieve extraordinary collective results. Instead of relying on individual mastery developed over decades, they embed expertise into processes that can be learned quickly and executed consistently. Instead of creating exclusive access to quality goods and services, they systematically democratize access through efficient production and distribution. He paused, thinking about that first bite of a McDonald's hamburger and how it had tasted like something entirely new. Not the best food he'd ever eaten, but the most democratic food he'd ever eaten. If we are to compete with America, he continued writing, we must understand that they are not just more efficient at making things. They are systematically redesigning human organization itself to maximize collective prosperity rather than individual excellence. The question we must answer is whether Japan can adapt these principles while maintaining our cultural values, or whether we must choose between tradition and progress. As he sealed the report that would influence Japan's post-war reconstruction policies for decades to come, Kenji realized that a simple hamburger had taught him more about American power than all his years of military intelligence analysis. The Americans hadn't just won the war through superior technology and industrial capacity. They had created a social system that continuously generated innovation, prosperity, and opportunity by making excellence accessible to everyone rather than exclusive to the few. And sitting in his hotel room overlooking the Detroit River, Kenji understood that Japan's future would depend on learning to balance the wisdom of traditional mastery with the transformative power of democratic systems. The hamburger had been perfectly ordinary, but the system that created it was revolutionary. And revolution, he now understood, didn't always come from the battlefield. Sometimes it came from a teenager in a paper hat who could serve hundreds of people a day with efficiency and dignity that honored both the work and the workers. As he prepared for sleep, Kenji made a mental note to visit McDonald's one more time before returning to Japan. Not to study their methods, but simply to experience again that remarkable feeling of being served excellent food quickly and affordably by a system designed to treat every customer as equally worthy of quality, speed, and respect. It was, he realized, a taste of the future. And the future was democratic.